Nexus 5 is a hybrid virtual analog synthesizer combining subtractive synthesis with sample playback, as well as wavetable, granular, FM, and other types of synthesis. Let's take a look at the signal flow. We have up to 64 oscillators that are combined into one or more layers. And on each layer, you can filter the sound, process it with layer effects, and shape it with envelopes. After that, the layers are combined, and the signal is processed by a global effects chain. Now here we have the initialized saw waveform that's called up when you launch Nexus. And if we jump to the routing page, we can get an overview of the signal flow. Here's one oscillator set to this saw waveform, which flows into a layer. And that can optionally go to a layer-based effects block, which we'll set up in a moment, and then onto the main effects. So here, if I click on the header, it'll jump to the layer page, and we can see a set of layer controls for this one oscillator. So maybe I want to filter it. Dial up some resonance. We have a dedicated filter envelope with its own envelope controls. And then we have an amp envelope. Now for a bass sound like this, maybe I want to turn on the portamento effect so I can get a little bit of a pitch glide transition between notes. We can sync the speed of it or set it manually and set it to whatever mode we need. Now here we see the raw waveform, and here it's set to virtual analog, and these are the different types that are available. And I can switch it here and set multiple types of parameters. For example, maybe I want to hard sync it. And I can add on an additional oscillator. If I click the plus sign, and I get a duplicate analog saw waveform, but I can switch this to a different type of oscillator block. Here I'll choose retro, and I'll call up one of the samples from the factory library. And I'll choose this. I can solo it, bring it up an octave, add some drive. So it adds a nice attack component. Without it, with it, and there are the parameters for the initial saw wave. And if I jump back to the routing page, we'll see now these two oscillators routed into this layer. So I can click here and route this to a new effects group. And here I'll go to add effects, and I'm going to start by adding a compressor. You see the gain trace. I can adjust the parameters as needed. I'm going to slow the attack a bit, quicken the release. Adds a bit of weight, and I'm going to add another effect. Under creative, add some noise. And we see an overview here, and I can change the order by clicking and dragging. So here we have two oscillators feeding into a single layer and then to a single effects group. Let's turn this saw wave into a pad. I'm going to jump over to the layer page, and I'm going to start by slowing down the attack. Put it to about 2 seconds. 2.5 seconds. I'm going to slow down the release as well. And I'm going to switch this out from a virtual analog to a granular oscillator. And here I can use search to call up what I want. I'm going to go to factory presets, and I'm going to type in strings. And let's try some of these. All right, let's start with that. I can filter this. Now I want to add some motion to this sound. I want to modulate this granular position parameter and maybe the filter a little bit. So we can use the modulation matrix here. I'm going to use LFO1. For my destination, I'm going to set filter 1 cutoff. And we'll dial in. And you can see it moving. You can hear it. And And I'll make it bipolar, but that's not what I want. I want it just above this cutoff value. So this filter cutoff is being modulated with this repeating cyclical form or low frequency oscillator. And we can control this layer-based LFO1 parameter here. I can speed up how fast it goes through this repeating cycle, adjust the depth of it, change the shape, and I can break up the movement so that it's more of a step. But for now, let's leave it at sine wave. I'll go back to half notes, and we'll leave it nice and smooth. And we can have a trigger with each new note on, or based on the arpeggiator. For now, no trigger is fine, as it's restarting smoothly with each new chord. And I can click here to get into more advanced parameters to shape this low frequency oscillator more. Let's reuse this LFO1 to modulate the movement of other parameters in this layer. And in this case, specifically to oscillator 1, to the grain position. And again, dial in some depth. And you can see that here, but in this case I want to make it bipolar. It's moving in multiple directions. And while we're at it, let's use the same LFO for some subtle panning. Now I can pan just this oscillator or all the oscillators in the layer by using this. In this case there's only one oscillator, so it doesn't make a difference, but you can access them individually like that. And again, I'll make this bipolar. Let's create a second layer. I'm going to set this to wavetable for the oscillator block. And I'm going to call up something like this, maybe. That's fine. I'm going to slow the attack down again. And release. Great, and let's filter it. We'll use a different type of filter, maybe a bandpass, to get a different range. And I'm going to solo this so we can work on it in isolation. Because it's wavetable, we can alter the sound by modulating these parameters. I'm going to Option or Alt-click to reset these. I'm going to set the position at the bottom. And I'm going to go to the step sequencer patterns. We can set the number of steps we want over here. Set the speed. We'll go for something a bit around quarter notes. And we can adjust the contour of the steps and even the depth. Now we can set the routing up here, but we can also drag and drop by clicking there and dragging this, for example, to position. And the routing is set up for us, and I'll make it bipolar. And I'm going to take this and drag and drop it here as well. Maybe a little less depth. And formant. Maybe I'll slow it down a bit. Let's bring in the other oscillator. Less depth, and maybe I'll set this up for panning as well, and I'll use that same LFO, and of course in this case I'm going to go to the oscillator 2 panning, and I'll do it in the opposite direction. Whereas on the first layer the panning is starting on the right side, here it's starting on the left. Now here in the routing matrix, we'll see we have these two oscillators each feeding into their own layer. So now I can easily process them each with their own unique effects. So here I'll solo this first layer. And I'll solo this instrument. And I can click here and create a unique effects group. So here, let's give it a name. And I can add an effect, maybe a phaser. And now I'll solo the second layer and drag over here to create a second effects group, and we can name that pads as well. And we have 1 and 2. So here I can add a different effect. Maybe I'll add ensemble. And together. Now let's say I want to process all of these sounds together. Maybe I want to add a reverb, but I want it to apply to both sounds. Well, I can use the main effects for that. And if I jump back to the main library tab here, we have modifiers and layers. And on modifiers, I can add the effect here. So maybe I'm going to go into delay and reverb, and I'm going to add void verb. So that adds a nice space that I want. And if I jump back here to the routing page, we'll see the void verb there. For my next sound, I'm going to start with this preset. And we'll see that it's a simple single layer sound. But I'm going to modify it. I'm going to start by changing the amp envelope and make it more of a pluck. A short release. And now on the routing page, I can right-click here and add another layer directly from here. But I'll jump here to work with this layer. So let's solo it. I'm going to switch it to sampler. And let's go into factory presets, and I'm going to load in Adagio. And I'm going to do the same thing. Make it more of a pluck. And I'll filter it. And let's blend it with the other one. So the two of them work nicely together. And maybe here I'll bring the volume of this one down. And now I want to add a nice delay onto both of them combined. So again, I can go back to here, and we see we already have a reverb. And I can add my effect here. And I'm going to go into all. And I like the bucket delay. Actually, let me mute that. If I want to add something else first. Try talkbox. I'm going to bring the dry signal up. And dial in just a bit of that. And now let's bring the delay in. I'm going to sync it. Dial down the feedback in the mix for the moment. And we'll bring it down to maybe 1/8 notes. Bring a little in. We'll filter the delays. And back on the routing page, we'll see this reflected here. And I can play with the order of these effects. So here I have the reverb, and the wet signal is being affected by these. But maybe I want it like that. I think I like the unconventional way. Let's put them all together. So that's an overview of the signal flow in Nexus 5. One or more oscillators are routed to one or more layers where they're filtered, processed with layer effects, and shaped with envelopes. The layers are then combined. The signal moves through an effects block where it's processed globally by an effects chain, and then onto the output. So experiment, have fun, and enjoy Nexus 5.